He's doing that for us, and provide a brief bio on the featured women composers. Because female composers and performers have had so much difficulty in having their works heard in a predominantly all-male profession, the concert, which is called Kolat Nashim, the voices of many women, was designed to elevate women to their well-deserved position. Jacobson has served for 45 years as professor of music and director of choral activities at Northeastern University. So long story short, he is going to speak just to us, but the program they have done all over the place, but it will be really worth coming to if you are interested in music, and even if you're not. All right, without further ado, David, in the next life, you'll be on time, correct?
Well, as they say sometimes, it's nice to be late to your own funeral.
All right, without further ado, I'm going to let David introduce himself and tell you what he does, and then he can begin his program.
All right, wonderful. Well, there are some of you that I actually know. So nice to see you again. And there are plenty of people here I see, so I apologize. And again, if I would like this to, of course, be interactive. So if, and I also would suggest, if we're going to be interactive, if you could also be on your video when you're talking. I can't fit you all on one screen, so I'm not going to be able to see all of you either way. But welcome, and I want to introduce you to the teachings of Kabbalah having to do with reincarnation, right? And as many of you may know, reincarnation is actually not an accepted tenet or belief in mainstream Judaism. And that includes all of the denominations, meaning from the most liberal to the most Orthodox. Reincarnation is not part of the Jewish belief system, but it has been a part and an essential and central part of the Kabbalistic tradition, going back at least to the 12th century. So almost 1,000 years going back in time. All right, so I'm assuming I can share my screen. Let's see if this will work. I thought we'd start with a little cartoon. The Center for Reincarnation Studies and the mat in front of the door says, "Welcome back." All right, so the idea then of reincarnation may seem at first glance to be about the return of you, that you are returning in yet another life. But we're going to challenge that idea. It's, as we'll see, there's going to be a confluence between the way the Kabbalah suggests and also Buddhism and Hinduism look at the notion of reincarnation. All right. I would love it if you, as we go along, if you can place some questions in the chat, and whoever is hosting, they could maybe look at some of the questions and see what the trends are in terms of the questions, and we could certainly leave some time at the end to answer those. But I also would suggest that if you have a question that really will be important to ask as we go along, please do that, okay? All right, so what I want to present tonight then is not only the views from Kabbalah, but also from science. And you might think, especially if you're a scientist, what does science have to say about reincarnation? It seems to be almost like a belief or something that we would have faith in, but we will see, in fact, that there is quite a bit of scientific evidence that points us in a direction of reincarnation as well. All right. So some of you may have heard this story before, but it's worth repeating. It's one of my favorites. Um, and since I was asked also just to introduce myself, I started Kabbalah Experience here in Denver um, in 2003. Actually, I started teaching classes, and have been teaching actually Kabbalah classes for long before that in Rabbi Twersky's synagogue. But uh, creating my own way of teaching that started in 2003, and thankfully we've had um, actually at this point close to 1,500 people taking classes with us through the years, and it has been a not only in terms of a teaching, but also in terms of my own learning and my own spiritual development. It's been amazing to be able to teach. So there's an old phrase in Ethics of the Fathers that says, "Who is the wise person? The one who learns from everybody. And who have you learned more from than anyone else but your students?" So I really do appreciate and have learned so much from the people that I study with. I'm also a psychologist and have an active therapy practice, and that also has helped me to formulate uh, a teaching of Kabbalah that helps people really look at their lives, change their awareness about things, and move forward. All right, so why come up with the notion of reincarnation? That's going to be something we get into. But first, the story. All right, so many years ago, one of my friends, a colleague from Los Angeles named Rabbi Abner Weiss, came to speak about Kabbalah and reincarnation here in Denver. And he was invited as a scholar in residence to BMH, the synagogue on Monaco. And at that time, Stanley Wagner, the rabbi, already was emeritus, but he was a good friend of um, the rabbi from Los Angeles. And therefore, he was there to introduce him and uh, and of course, to listen. And Rabbi Weiss has a book out actually called Connecting to God. And it's an absolutely worthwhile book to read on Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. And in it, he also addresses tangentially the issues of reincarnation. But on that Shabbat, his topic, in fact, was reincarnation. And Rabbi Weiss is also a regression therapist, which means that he puts people into a semi-state of hypnosis and has them recall their earliest memories, which, as we'll see later on when we talk about that, can include memories of a previous life. So he was telling the following, he told many stories of his work with clients and also congregants around past lives and regression, and highlighted one of the stories, which was a woman who had come to him seeking to convert to Judaism. She was a stellar student and had attended all of the classes and was certainly seen by him as a very sincere person who wanted to uh, become Jewish. Well, as many of you know, the final step in conversion is going to the mikveh and immersing in water. That water then is symbolically and through the ritual, the last part of the conversion process, because they are converting, they're transforming into this new identity as a Jew. So Rabbi Weiss, as any other rabbi would do, convened a a group of 3 rabbis to witness the conversion, the going into the mikveh. It's done privately, of course, but the woman did not show up, and she and with no phone call, no nothing. And as it turned out, she wasn't just late; she didn't show up at all. So um, he was, of course, very perplexed why this woman didn't show up, and tried to call her, no answer. Finally, she did call him and made an appointment to see him. And when she came into his office, she was emphatic still that she wanted to convert to Judaism. But why was it that she didn't show up? And her explanation was that it had nothing to do with her commitment. There was something that she had struggled with and she was embarrassed to talk to him about, and that was she was deathly afraid to go into water. She thought, with all that was on the line, that she would be able to overcome her fear and show up and immerse in the mikveh, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. After some other discussions about her fear of water, what was the origin of that, they couldn't really locate anything in her life that would have led to this great fear of water. Now, Rabbi Weiss is used to regressing people, and he did just that, put her into a little bit of a hypnotic state. And what became revealed in her state of hypnosis was that she had died during the Holocaust, drowned to death. That was the cause of her death. Now, what was important, and we'll come back to this point later, was that after she revealed this to Rabbi Weiss, she was then able to go into the mikveh and complete her conversion process. So here I was, sitting in the audience, enjoying a Shabbat lunch and listening to these stories of Rabbi Weiss, when Rabbi Wagner gets up and says the following. The stories you've told, Rabbi Weiss, are compelling, they're powerful, but I do want to let you know that I've spent all my years in the rabbinate and in this congregation letting people know that reincarnation has absolutely no place within Judaism. It's an idea that really does not belong as a Jewish concept. And to bolster his point, he said that even though there were maybe Kabbalists who through the generations had talked about this idea of reincarnation, that the major rabbis, most importantly Maimonides, who we follow in terms of Jewish law, Maimonides does not mention reincarnation at all throughout all of his writings, whether they were the philosophical writings or his Jewish law writings. He does not mention reincarnation at all. So therefore, following the footsteps of Maimonides, even though what you have presented is interesting, I'm sorry to say that I would still tell my congregants to basically ignore what you have said. Now, of course, I knew Rabbi Wagner well, and I know Rabbi Weiss, and I figured, how are we going to get out of this conundrum? So I raised my hand from the back, and yes, Natalie, I see your message, so that'll be interesting to hear. But just to finish the story, so I raised my hand from the back, and I said that I think I have an answer to the problem that's being presented here. And what I suggested was that Rabbi Wagner was reincarnated from Maimonides, and therefore had his strong position that reincarnation had no place within Jewish thought. Well, everyone laughed. Rabbi Weiss felt a little vindicated, and I had a close relationship with Rabbi Wagner. I was a little afraid to say what I said, but it was wonderful of him. He also laughed and said in Yiddish, halavai, which means if only I was reincarnated from Maimonides. So he took that as a nice compliment, and we were able to move on. I do want to return to a number of things that this story highlights, and that is, why would Rabbi Wagner or others, including my own father, who was a rabbi, be so against the idea of reincarnation? It's one thing to say, I don't know, I haven't experienced it, I don't know it to be true, but why would they philosophically be against reincarnation? So we'll come back to that question as well. But Natalie is saying that she has a story too. If I'm
Yeah, no, it's Jerry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Natalie is here, but this is Jerry.
All right, Jerry. Hi, and I'm glad I can see you because you're right in front of me, so that's good.
Yeah. A few years ago, there was a story on, I believe it was NBC News, on their Today Show, of a 4-year-old boy that insisted to his parents that his name was, I don't remember, but it was a different name, and that he was married 4 times and he worked in the film industry. And the parents initially just disregarded what he said, but he kept repeating it. And they went to the Screen Actors Guild and they found a producer by that name. And they looked up the history, and he had been married 4 times. And they showed that they found an obscure picture. This was not a very famous person. And it was a picture of about 4 or 5 different people. And when they showed it to the kid, he points to it. He says, "That's me." And they just couldn't find any other explanation for it, because if they had tried to make it up, they wouldn't have been able to find that information by themselves. It was so obscure. And that was one story. There was another one about a man who was also, he was deathly afraid of water all his life, but he had this vision of a house in Scotland. And he went to this town and found the house. And when he went in to talk to the people in the house, there was a picture of their son that drowned in the swimming pool.
Mm.
That wasn't as convincing to me as the first story, but that first one was really amazing.
Well, and it's Jerry, you said?
Yes.
Jerry, thank you for sharing those. And there are many, many stories to share. I have a personal story that I can share as well. And I would also welcome if among this whole audience that's participating here, if any of you have a story to share that's more personal, I certainly would welcome that. And Jerry's story, the first story, illustrates something important, and that is, and this is a little backed up by what we call science. So this is not just anecdotal, right? In other words, we listen to stories and we hear them, and we could say about some 4-year-old or even 5 or 6-year-old, or, well, what did the parents tell them, or what did they see on television, or what are they fantasizing? And then we look for evidence, and then we find it and we link it up. But there is a center for the study of reincarnation at Duke University, I believe it is, and it's a ongoing research that has been looking for evidence, particularly with children, tracking down that kind of story and finding the evidence. Much of the work is done in India, even though it's a American-based university. Much of that work is done in India, but there's also some rather well-known stories from the United States that have come out of that research. All right. So there is some, and we'll talk a little about it a little more. There is a little science that's behind that, because remember, scientists start with a hypothesis, and the hypothesis that they start with um, is reincarnation a possible, probable, or more likely explanation for the evidence that's being presented? And just because we're on this topic already, we do know, for instance, of children that come into this world with rather unique gifts. We usually call them child prodigies. The question, though, is how does a child come into this world with such amazing talents or gifts, or knowledge of a foreign language that has never been spoken around them? So these pieces of evidence are also something, and I would call them corroboratory. They're not solid pieces of evidence, but they're corroboratory to at least have us ask those questions of ourselves, which is, how does this child know what they know? All right. And Jerry, also, just since you pointed it out, the researchers say that it's of crucial importance to get to a child between the ages of three or so, and 6 or 7, because after that, the memories begin to fade. You have to wait at least till 3 years old or so, because you want the child to be verbal enough that they can actually tell a whole story. Um, and I can also alert you to other stories that are out there that are fairly convincing. But this is not the only piece of science that we will kind of look at. All right, but let's get back to the Kabbalah piece of things and try to understand from that point of view why they introduced the notion of reincarnation into Jewish thought. All right, so I'd like to, well, I'll choose, I'll see if I can do without sharing the screen. So all of you are obviously very aware of what happened in Boulder this week. And of course, it's a tragedy that has impacted not just, of course, the 10 people that were murdered, but all the people that are connected to them. And these lives were, let's call it, cut short. So there was an interesting idea in the very beginning of the notions of reincarnation, that if a life was cut short, then the soul that was connected to that life would come back into another life, so that in a way that life could be further redeemed, continue in another form, right? So the idea then of one idea behind reincarnation is that it's a comforting notion to think that, even though a life was cut short, that life could continue in another form, right? And the Kabbalists, in fact, in the 12th century, have the initial text of reincarnation, say that reincarnation is a way for us to understand why infants or children who die, who have not done anything to blemish who they are, why was their life cut short? Well, understand though that they will come back. All right. So that was one of the initial reasons for the notion of reincarnation. And embedded in that is an idea actually that the child or one of these people in Boulder that was murdered, that they somehow would come back. Their life would be extended through another life. All right. So if we begin to, though, to understand reincarnation from a different point of view, we'll see that that the Kabbalah is actually suggesting that it is not the human life that comes back, it's the soul that comes back. So the term in Hebrew for reincarnation is called Gilgul Nishamot, and the word Gilgul comes from the Hebrew word gal, which is connected to the idea of a wheel that rotates, right? So one life comes to an end and the soul departs, and that soul will come back on the wheel of life. This is also the same imagery that is talked about in Eastern religions, that the wheel of life circles back and cycles back, and in a way, it's the recycling of the soul. So what do we mean by that the soul comes back? So this pushes us into beginning to understand what a soul is. And if we were in class together, I'd be asking you questions and getting your input. I'm not a big fan of lecturing, but since we have such a large crowd and it's on Zoom, I'll give you a little more input in terms of the way that the soul is seen through the lens of Kabbalah. So the soul is actually seen as a complicated structure, but in the essence of the soul, it's about our consciousness and our awareness, how that soul connects us to other souls, how we are all interconnected through the awareness of the soul's how to say the web-like fashion of our interconnection through the experience of soul. And that applies to our current lives, meaning how interconnected we are, the idea that we find our soulmate, right? We connect with the Basheret, the soulmate, because that soulmate was in the realm of awareness and consciousness. We were separated somehow, and now we have found each other. Jerry, I can't see exactly because you're about the size of a postage stamp, but I think that you're smiling. And the question we have to ask is, how do we find each other, right? The miracle of our connecting to each other. And that's not just about finding a basheret or a romantic partner. It's also about the family that we came into, the friends we meet, the colleagues we have at work. How do we get connected and find each other? And we all know stories that are remarkable about how people find each other or reconnect with each other. Um, you know, neighbors that maybe don't see each other that much on their block, but then meet while they're trekking in Nepal, and or wind up in the same. I had someone say to me yesterday that they dated for a while, and then they both met up at the Hershey chocolate factory many years later, and of course they didn't even know that the other person was going there, and they wound up getting married later because they reconnected. So the idea then of soul is of how we are connecting with those people, places, ideas that are going to allow us to continue in our spiritual growth. It's almost like the soul is a little bit of a GPS system. It's guiding us. It's a guided personal spiritual um, apparatus that's helping us to connect with the people and, as I said, the places and ideas that we need to. And this explains also, by the way, why we can have the phenomenon of deja vu, right? In other words, I think all of us have had certain times where we have felt, this seems very familiar to me. I feel like I've been here before. And obviously, if you're taking the position of reincarnation, it may well be that you were there before. Now, when I say you were there before, I don't mean you or me. I mean that the soul that you are in, that awareness that you're in, has been there before. So if we go back to that woman who Rabbi um, Abner Weiss was involved with and who was trying to convert to Judaism, when she says that she has a memory that she died in the Holocaust by drowning, it doesn't, the way that I would interpret that through the Kabbalah that I've studied, is that it's not that she, the woman who is, living in Los Angeles, died in the Holocaust. It's that the soul that was attached to the person that died in the Holocaust has now come back, right? That's what Gilgul Neshamot means. The soul is being reincarnated. And since there was an attachment and a connection to that other person's life that was cut short, whether it was in the Holocaust or in Boulder, that person who is now inheriting the recycling of that soul has an impression from the previous life, because the soul is a repository of the awarenesses and memories of having been, not maybe just in one life, but in many lives. And that's what the 4-year-old in Jerry's story is remembering. It doesn't mean that the 4-year-old lived at that as that producer who had married 4 women. It is that the soul that was connected with the Hollywood producer has now found its way into this 4-year-old. All right, so that's the idea then of what Kabbalah is presenting. And the further scientific piece, besides following up on stories of children and corroborating their stories, it was also why reincarnation became a popular notion, especially in the United States, among psychiatrists and psychologists who were working with clients who were not getting better. So if you have had an interest in reincarnation, you probably have come across the name Brian Weiss. But there are other famous psychiatrists along with him who had clients that no matter what they tried to do, they were not able to help them overcome their symptoms, anxiety, fears, and um, through some of the hypnosis that they would um, have the patients go through, the patients, then their clients would start talking about experiences that they had, but those experiences were not in this lifetime. Now, if you are a psychiatrist and you want to figure out whether a new treatment, whether it is a therapy type of treatment, is effective, is EMDR effective, um, is um, is medication effective? The way that we go about proving something is we run a randomized experiment and we see if, in fact, there's efficacy for the particular treatment. What the confluence of what was going on for many of these um, mental health professionals was that in many of the cases that they were dealing with, the people that they were trying to heal and help, it was only after, during regression and hypnotic regression, that when people revealed what had happened to them in a prior life, it was then and only then that their symptoms abated. So that then became the basis for understanding that there was, the only explanation they could come up with was that the reason that these clients had not gotten better before was that they had not been able to talk about and um, process the trauma that had happened in a prior life, and only after they had, then they could move forward. All right. So let me respond to some questions that are being posted. All right. So first of all, is it Arlen?
Yes.
Okay, let me try to find you. Ah, Arlen, I see you now. Okay, so you are saying that the search for Bridie Murphy. Mm-hmm.
It was written by my cousin.
So Arlen, tell us a little about your understanding and your experience.
Well, Laurie Bernstein, hold on. You're getting two voices or just one?
Just yours.
Good. My cousin, Laurie Bernstein, was a Pueblo businessman. Very wealthy, very brilliant, very bored with life in Pueblo, and started playing with hypnosis as a hobby. Mostly to help people quit smoking or develop ways of getting around some bad habits, things like that. And he did discover the age regression issues that you've spoken of. And when he found a very good subject, a woman named Virginia Ty, whose husband was a car salesman in Pueblo, eventually was a owner of an agency in Denver. But she was a very good subject. And Laurie did some age regressions on her And she was so successful. She was doing so well. The thought occurred to him, what if I took her back before she was born? And he did. And she started talking about life in Ireland in the 18th century. Her name was Bridget Murphy. She lived in Dublin, was married to a barrister, and talked in several sessions about a lot of details of life in Ireland. The Denver Post, in learning of this, sent a reporter, Bill Barker, to Ireland to research. He returned having, I think, been convinced that Bridie Murphy lived and that this was a true phenomenon. But he came up with no definite proof of a Bridie Murphy because there was no records of that were that old. But Barker was a prominent figure in Denver television, radio for many years, and always talked about his Bridie Murphy research. Marty Bernstein was somewhat of a recluse. Became fascinated with his subject, did other research on extrasensory perception. Helped fund the Duke University program you're referring to. Passed away a few years ago. And rarely come out of his apartment. A little bit like Howard Hughes. He was very wealthy and only had a couple of people that ever saw it. I happen to be fortunate enough to have been one of the people that did see it and talked to him about it. And I've lived with it basically all my life, fascinated by it and looking to see some way of disproving it. But I've never found anything that really disproved it. Time magazine claimed that was, they used information that was very doubtful.
Well, thank you, Arlen. Thank you very much for sharing that. Bridie Murphy is, of course, a very famous example of this, that whole story. And there are many, many other stories. By the way, the researcher from Duke, his name is Dr. Ian Stevenson, and you can certainly look him up. Many famous examples and cases that he investigated as well, all across the world. All right, so Alan also asked a question, which is, are all of us products of reincarnation? And the answer from Kabbalah's perspective is yes. If you're here, you've been here before. Now, what you could ask, I've got enough problem tracking my own life and all the problems from my childhood and all and maybe some good things from childhood too, but why bother with understanding that I am perhaps reincarnated from another life? So I want to suggest, and if you could, I would like you to, whoever's controlling this thing, if we could go back to the full screen, just to be able for me to see the folks and most of the faces as I explain this. And now we've got Arlen. Let's see if I can figure out how to do this. The view is gallery. Okay, good. I could control it too. All right, thank you. All right, so in the end result, final analysis, while I would like you to at least be intrigued by the stories that we've talked about, by the tradition that's there in the Kabbalah about reincarnation, if you leave tonight thinking no different than if you came in saying, I just don't understand this, I don't accept it, I don't relate to it, I would like you to relate to the following. And there is something that this notion of reincarnation pushes us to understand about ourselves. Now, if you accept the notion of reincarnation, then you're the soul that is in you, or you are in it, has been around many lifetimes. And therefore, maybe you should begin to think a little more about who you are in this lifetime. We have a tendency to get very definitive about our identity here in this lifetime. And what we spend in our Kabbalah study talking about a lot is the masks that we wear. We are carrying with us, wearing so many masks. Masks that we were born with, based on our genetics, the body that we inhabit, our religious identity, our gender identity. All of these can be seen by some of us as defining who we are. Now, as we teach in Kabbalah, we're not against masks. Masks are wonderful. There's nothing pejorative about them. We all need a body in which to exist. But the body is not us at our essence, at what we call the soul level. The body is a vehicle for our authentic expression. Our gender is a vehicle. Our religious identification is a vehicle. We have learned in the last little while how fluid all of these defining characteristics are who we think we are. So we call them in Kabbalah masks. Again, nothing pejorative about that, meaning nothing negative about looking at things as masks. And they're masks even if you can't take them off. But what we're trying to understand is who we are at the deepest level, beyond all of the masks. And if we understand what reincarnation is really trying to help us appreciate, is that the soul, as it comes into this world, will put on all of the masks that are you, also you. But they are yet masks. So I would hope that you could then begin to see, even if you don't see the value of this, of the notion of reincarnation, it will help you to see that it's important to evaluate or reevaluate who you are at your essence and what soul really represents, right? I will share with you one story, one personal story. So I have 5 children. They're not, I actually should rephrase that. I'm raising 5 children. 3 of them, thankfully, are adults already. So They're well on their way, but I have two 9-year-olds. I have two sets of twins, older twins and 9-year-old girls who are identical twins. Now, when we were expecting our girls, and I already, of course, knew that they were going to be twins and that they were identical, many people would say to me, "Oh, do twins run in your family?" And not only that, first of all, the twins that I have are from different marriages. So they automatically said, "It must be you. You're the one. You're the one who's carrying this twin piece." And in truth, scientifically, the father has nothing to do with the genetics of twins. It comes from the maternal side. So I dismissed that idea that I had anything to do with these twins, except, of course, fathering them. All right, so here I was teaching a class. They were born on June 17th, and I was teaching a class on reincarnation that summer. And the topic of the Holocaust came up. There's a well-known book called Beyond the Ashes, which is a worthwhile book to read in terms of the reincarnation of people from the Holocaust. And there was an awareness that had never been part of my thinking before, which was that, and many of you will know about this, that during the Holocaust in Auschwitz, there was a horrific section of the camp that was run by Joseph Mengele, a physician, in which he was studying twins. He was notorious for his experiments. He would often experiment on one twin to see the effects of these horrific chemicals that he would put into their bodies. And then once that first twin died, he would then kill the other twin. I had never really thought much about Mengele. And as I'm talking about reincarnation, I'm thinking for the first time, maybe I do have something to do with twins. Now, I've gone through many regressions myself, and every regression I've gone through leads to the Holocaust. Now, I'm a little bit of a skeptic myself when it comes to things like this. I'm a pretty rational person. So, I could always think to myself, well, when I was growing up, all of my friends, I should say not all, but many, many of my friends' parents were survivors of the Holocaust. And it was part and parcel of my growing up. So the fact that I had fears about and dreams about the Holocaust as a child, that could account for why I was thinking these thoughts even, more currently. But regression after regression, I would have the experience of being in the Holocaust myself, and specifically at Auschwitz. And I have other corroborative pieces around that. So then I started thinking, maybe these little girls that are coming into my life, actually our souls were connected before. Now, my wife picked their names. She wanted to name them, and of course, if she wanted to, that's the way it went. She wanted to name them Isabel and Eva, and that is their names. These are names that I never would have picked. And therefore, the names Isabel and Eva seemed to me also to be coming from a different generation. They were certainly not what we'd call modern names. And I selected their Hebrew names, Chava and Zahava, but their English names were Eva and Isabel. A few months afterwards, after I was researching names from the Holocaust, twins that were at Auschwitz with the names Eva and Isabel, I was not able to find those names of twin girls. But not long after this, I became connected with the woman who started a support group and then also a museum to honor the surviving twins of Dr. Joseph Mengele's experiments. Her name is Eva Kor. And I had the wonderful experience of meeting her here in Denver when she came to visit. And we had a wonderful private session with her. So for me personally, I feel that the notion of reincarnation helps me to understand how I am connected to my children, to these girls. And I will tell you one quick thing, not meant to convince you, but just to create curiosity. Little Eva, when she was about 15 months old, maybe 16 months old, I think we were laying in bed one day and my wife had put her hand on my hand, and Eva came along and took my wife's hand off of me and put her own hand on me. And my wife looked at me and was like, whoa, where did that come from? And both of us had that feeling that Eva and I were connected in a soul way before. Now, again, I'm not telling you this story, or Arlen is not telling his story, or Jerry is not telling his story per se to convince you of something. I would like you to be curious. I would like you to be open to the idea of perhaps that, your soul, the soul that you inhabit has been here before. All right, so let me respond to some of the questions. Why is mainstream Judaism? This is the last one that was written, but I know there's ones before it. Why is mainstream Judaism against it? Well, why was Rabbi Wagner and my dad and others against the notion? Because what's important from that point of view in Judaism is how crucial this life is. If we have this notion that, well, we, meaning I will be reincarnated again. So it's like, all right, well, if I don't get everything accomplished this life, I'll get it done next life. Not such a big deal. So there was that notion of emphasis from their point of view that this is your one opportunity. Make the most of it. Do what you need to do now. Act as if this is your last day of life, your last life, and really do what you need to do. All right? So I think that's why they're against it. Now, if we begin to understand the way that I've presented what Kabbalah is suggesting, there is no difference. What I mean by that is, this is your only life. This is your only life. It is not your soul's only life. So in that way, I don't think if I would have been able to explain that to Rabbi Wagner, that maybe he would have understood it from a different perspective. So I hope that clarifies maybe the differences that are there. Someone asked also, if we all have all been here before, can there be any new souls? The general idea in Kabbalah is no, that that there were a certain amount of souls created, and that those souls are working their way through the generations, and in a way will find their culmination and fulfillment in the end. So we're all interconnected, and we even travel in soul groups according to the Kabbalists from Tzfat. But you know, there's the notion that there aren't new souls. Are there some Kabbalists that suggest that on occasion there is a new soul? The answer is yes. And yet, you know, I remember, I don't know if you remember this story from your own history, but I remember as a little boy hearing this story from one of my teachers, maybe it was my dad too, that, you know, Adam's soul was reincarnated or given a part of it to King David, right? So Adam was supposed to live for 1,000 years, and he saw this soul that wasn't going to live long, and he gave 70 of his years to King David that he should live. So, but the point of that teaching is also just to connect Adam and King David, and it's a whole other story. But this idea that, you know, souls are connected through the generations, that is something that's a well-known Jewish teaching. I think there was one other question here. Are there any consequences or benefits that souls have from a former life when they are reincarnated? Absolutely. There can be challenges, but there's also opportunities, right? If my soul is now being recycled into me, if the soul that I am part of is being recycled into me, I have a whole soul group that I am potentially connecting with. And, you know, even though you're little postage stamps on my computer screen, we are all connecting tonight, and you are connecting with each other. Many of you have been connecting for years because you're all going to the same synagogue. But the question you have to ask is, in a way, why am I finding this connection with you? How am I finding my puzzle piece with you? And as we mentioned before, there could be certain talents, experiences that we've had in a previous lifetime that will play out for us in terms of awareness in this lifetime. The population today is much greater than it was several centuries ago. So the new souls being created. Well, I know what the intent of this question is from Elena, because it's asked often, and there are some that would want to say that there are as many souls now as there have ever been on the planet. So in terms of historically, because we have many, many more people. And for that reason, there's a suggestion that we're coming to the end of the world as we know it. But someone else asked, do souls split? This is Lewis, and in some ways, Lewis, that notion, I see you on the screen here, Lewis, that the notion is that the souls, according to many of the Kabbalists, the souls can split, and therefore, you know, you might have a part of that previous life's soul, and I may have a part of that as well. It's intriguing to think about that, particularly with twins, and with even more so with identical twins, right? In other words, if they're both reincarnated, are they in a way sharing this soul that came down from another incarnation?
David, This is Marty Midas.
Yes.
I know you're going to want to wrap up here at some point.
Yes,
But
I will. Mark.
yes, you would. I know. I don't want to get you way off track here, but I do want to just comment. I think I had a discussion one time with Rabbi Twersky about this, that all of our souls, you have 617 mitzvahs that you have to do before you connect with God. And the soul may live one life, like when a baby's born and it takes a breath and dies. I believe he told me that baby has accomplished what it was supposed to accomplish for that lifetime. What do you think of that theory?
Yeah, well, remember what I said to you. The very first text in Kabbalah that addresses reincarnation, we have a manuscript from 1180, and there it talks about the death of newborns or infants, and how that soul will be reincarnated. All right. And then the other thing that you were mentioning is an idea by Isaac Luria out of Tzfat, which is that we have a certain amount of commandments to fulfill, and they're connected to all our body parts. There are 613, by the way. I'll be curious to find the other 4 that you have mentioned. I mean, there are another 7 rabbinical for 620, but that's a whole other story. But the idea of the 613 is that, perhaps you haven't completed, right, all of those, or the soul hasn't completed all of those.
We could just turn it off.
So they come back
Want to just leave?
to do some other ones. Okay, so that's a piece of that as well. But what I would suggest, to differentiate from what Rabbi Twersky said, and by the way, I studied with Rabbi Twersky every morning for 7 years while we were at TRI together. What I would suggest is that it's not the baby that's coming back. Let's remember that. It's the soul that was in that child or infant that is returning. And therefore, we could, in fact, combine what Rabbi Twersky was saying, which is that soul is coming back to another incarnation to complete the development of the whole structure, right? The doing of, quote, all the mitzvot.
Well, I found comfort in that if it is sort of a task that you have to accomplish in each lifetime, whether you know what it is or not, particularly with the Boulder situation. Maybe if you look at it as those people were, say the people who were 62 that died, that was their lifespan, that task that they were supposed to complete, and then they'll move on. I don't know why. That gave me some kind of comfort, thinking that we have things that we don't know we're supposed to accomplish in this lifetime. And when it ends, it ends.
So Marty, as I said to you in the early or the other side of Kabbalah, we would say, as I said at the very beginning, that's a comforting notion, right?
Right.
But I want to suggest, even though it may disturb that understanding, that it's not that 62-year-old is going to come back, but the soul that was connected with that 62-year-old will return. That's the notion. Okay.
But you don't believe in this task thing of the 613 mitzvahs that we have to accomplish, our souls have to accomplish to connect with God. Does that resonate with you at all?
No.
No. Okay.
Because,
That's fine.
because there's another important teaching within Kabbalah, that the soul doesn't need refinement. The soul is pure. The soul is consciousness and awareness. It is there to aid you and me, and that's why it comes back to allow us the growth that we need in this lifetime, whether it's a short one or a long one. So I again, if you want to be comforted by Rabbi Twersky's idea, absolutely, that is an idea that's there in the Kabbalah, and it's also there coming from Tzfat about the mitzvot. That's also a piece. But one of the things that you might want to think about in this context is because someone else asked, what do previous lives inform me about my life now? Think about, a value you have or a characteristic that you value. And what is that about, right? In other words, if maybe you're a humble person or a generous person or a person that had to struggle really hard to overcome um, a challenge that you had, well, perhaps we could say that was aided in a way by the prior experiences that you had. That um, you know, I'll close with this notion. Although once again I apologize because there was one comment here by Andrea that said my bubby used to call wild misbehaved children gilgals in Yiddish. Is it the same word as you're using? My bubby used to call us wilde chayas, which means wild animals. So I'm not sure exactly what she meant by gilgals, but maybe she maybe she was giving you a pass, which is that, oh boy, you obviously have a soul that was really challenging. But what I wanted to close with was that Isaac Luria in Safat suggested that people, if you were way too talkative in life, you didn't know how to listen, you'd come back as a rock. Or some other inanimate object that was forced to just be passive and listen. Now, whether you take that that notion seriously or not, in answer to Marty's point, what I would say is that sometimes we can get some clues about prior life experiences, not just from deja vu, but the talents that we have and the things that are important to us and what we value. Because what you may value very strongly about yourself and in others may reflect something that is in your experience, your soul experience from other lifetimes, right? And it may be because you need to rectify that in some way. You have to work against the prior experiences, fears, as we saw, that many people come into this world with or develop, or very positive things to make use of your talents. All right, so I really appreciate everybody having stayed on this long. And again, I apologize for my lateness, but someone did ask, according to Buddhism, we are freed from the wheel of reincarnation, we become self-realized and enlightened one with God, and then are joined God permanently. What does Kabbalah say about being freed of the wheel of reincarnation? So that is a similar idea that we find in Kabbalah. Not, but here again, it's not because I have become self-realized or you have become self-realized. It's really about the fact that the soul that, in a sense, has been used up. It has used up and found its purpose in a way to come back into the life of the enlightened one and find that awareness also in relation to prior lives. Okay. And there is a notion, by the way, in Buddhism that some people come back not for their own lives, but for others. The Bodhisattva, and in Kabbalah, it's called the tzaddik, the righteous one who comes back for the sake of others. Pam, thank you, and nice to see you. Oh, there you are. Okay, good. You're on my screen. Yay. All right. Well, nice to see many of you who I know from times we've spent in class together. And it would be lovely for me to get to know all of you. And do do look into Kabbalah Experience. We're here in Denver. Right now, we are primarily, well, I shouldn't say primarily, we are only on Zoom, and all our classes are on Zoom, but we will start a new semester in the first week of April. And we'll be doing some fun things like looking at Shtisel through the eyes of Kabbalistic teachings. I'm going to teach a class on that and The Crown. If any of you have watched that show, it's got a lot of deep lessons for us. We have a class on the level of nothingness and ayin. And then there are all of the foundation classes that you can also look into: soul and time, maybe even space this spring as well. So get to know us, and really appreciate the invitation that Lifelong Learning at Temple Sinai invited me to present to you.
David, thank you. It was worth the wait. I'm afraid I'm coming back as a rock because I'm a little talkative. So at any rate, thank you for being here tonight. And everybody, please give a little hand clap, even if we can't see it. Thank you, David. As usual, you're very interesting and informative.
All right,
See you all for the musical program, okay? Thanks, everyone, for coming tonight.